Hello, lovely people. It's been quite a long time since I have seen you, but I've come back today because Tati Westbrook is getting sued, and I have questions, and you have questions, and the internet had questions. And I was watching Angelica Oles, and she said I would really like a U.S. attorney to look at the case and talk about some of it. So I said to myself, well, gee, I know a U.S. attorney, and that's Kathryn. So I have our friend Kathryn here today. She's an awesome lawyer. She's an awesome friend, and she's here to talk about what the hell is going on with Tati. So hi, Kathryn.
Hello, Lauren. Thank you
Welcome.
for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I have no idea what I'm doing. You're the first guest I've ever had. So what's going on?
Okay, so first thing, the lawsuit is in California. I'm not a lawyer in California. I'm also not a lawyer on any of this. So these are all of our opinions, because lawyer, hashtag.
This isn't legal advice.
Exactly. It's all for entertainment. And there's a lot of entertainment.
So we're just here to have a good time and to answer some questions, but not officially.
Right. So you sent me the complaint. I used to watch Tati a lot, and then a whole lot of drama happened, and this seems to be different drama. So with her vitamin company, Halo Beauty, it was her and her husband James, and then someone named Swanson who got together to do the Halo Beauty company with vitamins. And the lawsuit's kind of about that.
What we all do know is that Tati had a vitamin company called Halo Beauty. So Tati had joined with Clark Swanson to create this company, and the lawsuit is about that. So in this complaint, which is long but very entertaining.
I think so.
In this lawsuit, Swanson, I want to call him Clarkson. So Swanson claims that Tati and James had come to him to change the percentage of the business. So originally they went into Halo Beauty, and Swanson had 50%, and James and Tati combined. James, her husband, not James Charles. James and Tati Westbrook had the other 50%. They came to Swanson and said, let's go in thirds, so 33.33% of the business. And this was all under the guise that in the future, Tati would launch more brands or more product lines, like makeup, like skincare, fragrance. These were all mentioned. And that would be the reason that they could go in thirds.
So it's really interesting. So that's what Swanson is saying in this complaint. And the complaint is just someone going, we had a deal, you reneged in the deal, or you hurt me, and I'm going to complain about it. So it's only Swanson's point of view. The complaint didn't have anything in writing. It didn't have any written contracts. It didn't cite anything from Tati or James or really anyone else about why they would have talked about makeup for a vitamin company, why they initially went 50-50, because with 3 people, if they didn't have anything in writing and it was all 3 people, it should be a third, and a third, unless from the very beginning you decide it's not going to be. And the complaint did have a little bit about why it was 50-50 originally.
Yes. And since we're talking about the complaint, it is important to understand about lawsuits that the initial complaint, or what is starting this lawsuit, is one-sided. So we are only hearing from Swanson, who is complaining about Tati. So we don't have a response from Tati yet. That will be part of the next steps. So we will talk more about what happens next. But I also wanted to point out what I found interesting in here, and I know that we had talked about this, is that Swanson is claiming that he is upset because...
I'm sure I understand. Siri is also upset.
So, sorry. What I found interesting is when we were reading the complaint, and we've talked about this, is when Swanson is talking about all of the things that he wanted to do in Tati Beauty, when you look at the only places that actual documents are cited, it's discussing Halo Beauty nutraceuticals, which was this new word that they had trademarked that was for the Halo Beauty vitamins that we know. But we also looked at the trademarks, and Halo Beauty had never trademarked anything regarding anything other than vitamins.
Right. So, and it is a little hard because you've got state trademarks and national trademarks also in other places. But when you want to start a business, if you want to do it correctly, you put either an intent to use, so I'm going to do this, use this name in this field, or you say I am doing it and you file for register a trademark, and you have to choose what categories. So if I want to make purses, I'm going to file in the category for purses. And just because I use a name in purses, that doesn't mean someone else can come and start a restaurant with the same name because they're in different categories.
Right. So I could start a restaurant called Coach, but I can't start making Coach handbags.
Exactly.
And I think that was really interesting to me because in this complaint, Swanson is talking with a lot of authority about how Tati said she was going to make makeup, she was going to make skincare, she was going to make fragrance, and then she went with Seed Beauty to launch Tati Beauty and to launch the Tati palette. Mm-hmm. And the other question that has come up is, we know that Tati sold over 200,000 of the Tati Beauty palettes, but in the complaint, it's only mentioned that he is asking for more than $25,000, which I know was interesting to me because I know that there's millions of dollars in these palettes. So what does that mean?
Okay, so it's actually some places you have to, in the very beginning, say exactly how much you're asking for. California is not one of them. The only thing you have to do is make sure you're going to get into the right court. And in California, where this is filed, it's less than a certain amount, between $10,000 and $25,000, or over $25,000. So when they say in the complaint that he's alleging damages of over $25,000, that just means that it wants to be in the court of unlimited civil jurisdiction, and it basically is where what judge you're going to be in front of and what rules you have to follow. It doesn't mean that the complaint is going to be $25,000. It could be $5 million. It could be $1 billion. In this case, you're not going to put more than $25,000.
Right, and I think so that was a big question that I had seen Angelica had mentioned and others I had seen pop up asking about this $25,000, and I had a feeling that it was most likely a legal situation, but I didn't know because it did seem odd. So again, just like the recap is that Swanson is upset because Tati launched her palette with Seed Beauty instead of launching underneath the Halo brand umbrella, and so he wasn't included in the financial gain of the Tati Cosmetics line. Why do you think that maybe she did this?
So it's really interesting. Either there was an agreement that everything is going to be under Halo Beauty, and there was a decision to breach the contract, or there was no contract.
Right.
If there was an agreement, like Swanson says, that everything under Tati Beauty is going to be under the Halo Beauty line, there actually might be a really good reason to breach that contract intentionally. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's why you don't do business with friends, because business is really only about money and making sure that your shareholders are happy. It doesn't really matter if there was an agreement. Financially, it might make sense to break an agreement if there's more money elsewhere.
Right. Well, and so as we were talking about this, I said that I think that if there was a breach of contract, if this was contractual and it was written down, which we don't know yet, and that's something that...
And it doesn't have to be written down in order to be a contract.
But we haven't seen any evidence that this was agreed to, aside from Swanson's claim that they went to lunch and talked about it, and Tati said that she would do this. But with Tati going to Seed Beauty, she is creating a palette basically like turnkey. She doesn't have to research the lab because she's going with Seed Beauty. And if you don't know, Seed Beauty is the company that does Kylie Cosmetics, KKW Cosmetics, and ColourPop. They're very well known. And Tati did talk about making this palette with Seed Beauty in her video about the palette.
You will find an address on the back of the palette. And for those of you that put on your investigation hats, then you will notice that I am manufacturing with Seed Beauty.
So this isn't a secret that she made it with Seed Beauty and that it wasn't under the Halo umbrella. By making it turnkey, she didn't have to find the palette components and find a manufacturer for that. She didn't have to find somebody at a lab and formulate the formulas herself or find a team of people. She went to Seed Beauty. Basically, she could say, this is my idea, and they could bring her things, and she could reject them or accept them over that amount of time. Kind of the same way that we see beauty influencers who do collaborations working. And what I find interesting about this is, in May of the same year that Tati launched her palette was the year that Jaclyn Hill launched the fuzzy lipsticks. So I think that it's also possible that there's this major drama about Jaclyn Hill making lipsticks that are furry and having no one to fall back on and say, like, they did bad, I didn't do bad. Like, obviously Jaclyn Hill chose the lab, she chose the people, she made those lipsticks, and she had no fall guy. And so I could see an incentive to go with someone like Seed Beauty, who is reputable in the industry, and Tati can know the quality of these products. But also, she's a fall guy. If we had gotten fuzzy palettes, she could have not necessarily been the person that we all directed our anger to. So I wonder, I mean, again, this is just theorizing, but it's very possible that that had an influence in her decision when we think of the beauty industry as a whole and kind of what we're seeing in those places. So I find that interesting.
It is. So people don't it's really hard to bring a product to market. With cosmetics lines, you have issues with what is actually in there. You have issues with, is it going to be cruelty free? How are you going to make sure that it's cruelty free? If you say it is vegan, what all is going on? Because stuff that you're putting on your face, putting in your body, there's a huge risk to people. And even if you do your due diligence, you do every single thing that you need to, the first time you do it, you basically have to go on trust that the manufacturer that you found is doing everything the way they should have, that they're not lying to you, that when they give you samples that they're able to recreate them.
Yes.
Huge problems. And so even if someone is incredibly capable of putting all that together, you don't have the track record of working with people who've done it for you in the past. Working with someone who has done it in the past and already has everything in place, has their relationships, so they actually trust their manufacturers, that is absolutely huge. Yes, you can come up with your own formula. You can decide, when I ask for this color, this is what you're going to be making this color of. It's going to look like this. And I know that because when you did this 5 times before, you've had consistent results.
Right.
That in and of itself is absolutely huge. And you're also not paying the huge amounts of R&D money that it would be to try to do it yourself with the huge risk.
Right.
Plus, if something bad does happen, you usually wouldn't want the same company that's doing all of that to have other assets. Because if you have a huge lawsuit, let's say something happens and you've got something in there that causes some people to break out into rash, or it causes huge harms, there's probably going to be a lawsuit, there's probably going to be some damages. You don't want a risk that all of your money on this other thing is going to be taken from the new venture. You want to completely separate those if you can. Right. And so, that's why when we've looked at, if you look at the complaint, there's Halo Beauty, there's a lot of different LLCs to try to protect assets. And so it wouldn't make sense for the same business entities to be doing beauty and nutraceuticals. You really want to separate those. And also, if anything's wrong with the nutraceutical line, which is nutritional pharmaceuticals, you don't want that to touch the beauty stuff because it's the same problem.
Right. Right, and so Tati is saving herself in a way here by if something went wrong. And I think that, what's fair to think about this is when you're dealing with vitamins, lots could go wrong.
Yeah.
That's something that you're ingesting, not something that you're just putting on your eyes. So there are lots of reasons that this decision could have been made that are reasonable, not morally incorrect, that Tati decided to go with Seed Beauty instead of doing it all on her own. So I think that that's an interesting part of this. And again, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what Tati's response will be. So it will be really interesting to see how this happens. But the important thing to remember is that lawsuits aren't like in TV, and they take quite a long
Yes,
time.
they do.
So can you speak to what kind of timeline we're looking at for this?
Yeah, so it's also important to note, so we have the complaint, and that's kind of when everyone figured out this was going on. It's been going on before then, too. So you also have to think about how long this has taken to get to this point.
Right.
But from now forward, if there's a couple of motions that can be filed by Tati and Tati, James, Halo, before they even answer. They might want to consider filing a motion to strike, so basically taking things out of the complaint that they don't want to answer. There's a couple of paragraphs in there that I would highly be upset about, and consider striking so you didn't have to answer them. There's also a question about jurisdiction, so is California the right place for this? Those types of things, if you have objections, you're going to want to at least consider that before you file an answer. And then you have to file the answer, and the answer can take months, depending on what her lawyers decided to do. Are you going to accept service, or are you going to waive service? It gives you a different deadline. Ultimately, if they're going to need more time to answer, it could be months before we actually get an answer. Even if you have a deadline, lawyers, you know this. Lawyers are famous for asking for more time. So even if we do have this is a date, this is going to happen, I would not hold my breath on that date that it's actually going to happen.
Right, because from assumption of and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand from my 6 hot seconds as a paralegal, is that because this lawsuit was filed in California, and as far as we all know right now, Tati is in Washington. If they served her as opposed to waiving service, she has 60 days to respond from what I understand. But that doesn't mean that an attorney can't file for an extension. Yeah. And in a situation like this, it wouldn't be shocking to see that. So it could still be until 21 that we really see a response from Tati in this action.
Yeah, and whether it's 21 days, 60 days, 30 days, we also don't know when the clock is going to start. So there's not really a date you can mark on the calendar.
No.
But once an answer is actually filed, the answer might have some information. It probably won't have a whole lot. What we need to look at is if there are counterclaims. And we do know a little bit about whether or not there are going to be counterclaims based on some information that was sent to another YouTuber, another lawyer. And we think there will be counterclaims. There might not be. There probably will be. So if there are, then Swanson gets an opportunity to respond, and he has more time.
Right. So, I guess what I think that I didn't know before I started working at a law firm is that this idea of lawsuits, it takes a very long time, and there's lots of variables. Yeah. So like you're saying, if Tati responds with counterclaims, we now then have to wait for a response from Swanson, and then they're going to go back and forth like that for who knows.
Well, because it's not just counterclaims, it's also other people.
Right.
So one of the things in the complaint, it talks about this whole, is this the Dramageddon, the James Charles stuff and all of that, and whether or not Tati had promised that she was going to bring fellow YouTubers in to help sponsor Halo Beauty, to help market it. If that becomes a real part of it, then let's say Tati says, okay, I promised that I would bring these people in based on their promise to me that they were going to sponsor it. I don't know if she would actually say this, but that is a possibility. She would then have to blame or basically say, I'm not the one at fault here, someone else is at fault here, and then she might want to bring them in on the lawsuit because basically if Swanson says there's damages because you didn't bring the marketing in here, Tati's going to have to say, okay, if there's damages because I didn't bring the marketing, I'm not to blame, it's someone else who had a duty that failed in their duty, and they would be brought in.
Right, and what's interesting about that, the names that are mentioned in this section about who Tati said she would give sponsorships for Halo Beauty and asked them to not have sponsorships with Sugar Bear Hair, which is mentioned in this complaint. Mm-hmm. Sugar Bear Hair is mentioned, but the influencers named are Jeffree Star, Manny MUA, Laura Lee, and James Charles, which is why everyone is talking about, did the latest video in Dramageddon 2, when in this Bi Sister scandal, when Tati made Bi Sisters, she could have actually been very upset about vitamins. Something she swore up and down she wasn't. But now there is legal action that suggests maybe otherwise. But again, we don't know.
Right.
I don't know. But I do think what's interesting about next steps is that after the responses and the counterclaims, we'll enter discovery.
Yes.
And what could get fun and exciting about discovery is that, from my experience, if someone is mentioned in the complaint for sure, they will be deposed, right?
They can be, yes. And there's going to be a whole lot of fighting over who, because you only have a certain number of people to depose, unless there's an agreement otherwise. There'll be a lot of fighting of and deposing is basically putting them in courts, in a lawyer's office and making them swear an oath to tell the truth, and then you ask them questions. It doesn't happen in a courtroom, but it can be used in court.
Yes.
And so is that going to be everyone mentioned in the complaint? Are there going to be more people? It's one of those things. There will be months of arguing about it before we even get to the point where is this person going to be deposed?
Right.
And then there's going to be a lot of electronic discovery. So tweets, YouTube postings, all of the metrics for all of the data, because that's going to be part of the damages in this. It's going to be, the evaluation of how much that Tati brought to the table. So it's absolutely insane how much information is going to be electronic, and then there's going to be arguments about that, and did they preserve them, and how it's going to be protected, because a lot of this is going to be public record, but there's huge trade secrets here, and so there's going to be some protection orders. This will take the better part of a year plus to settle out.
Right. Well, and I think and I just had this thought, so we haven't talked about this yet, but what's interesting is that it's very likely that part of discovery will be Tati's YouTube monetization numbers. How much money is Tati actually making? But what could get interesting there is that YouTube asks their creators to not share that information. So I don't know what comes there.
They'll be fighting about it in the suit. I don't think we'll see it. I definitely think that's going to be a trade secret. It's going to be something that's not going to be made. It should be something that is not going to be made public. And there's probably going to be fights over it, because what Tati is probably going to be saying is that it's not relevant because it's only the Halo Beauty stuff that's relevant. And so that's going to be a fight. And, whether or not she does that, because there's also some strategic things on it. Some of it, sometimes you just don't want to have the fight and you're like, okay, it's not going to hurt me. I'm going to give you the information. But it's going to be a huge fight before the information is turned over or not. There might be some court hearings on it that will probably be on Zoom. And this is going to cost so much money on both sides that the money that's being bantered about Halo Beauty, the lawyer fees might be even as much as that.
Right. And so I guess the other thing is some lawsuits go to trial and some do not. And my opinion, very uneducated, is that it's likely we will see a settlement in this for the very reason of how much money this is going to cost and how much money they're actually asking for.
Right.
And like we said, this is just what Swanson's asking for. We don't know that actual number. But the lawsuit does mention the many millions of dollars related to the many thousands of pallets that were sold. Seeing what damages he claims would be very interesting. But all in all, this is going to take a very long time.
It will.
And if it does go to trial, we won't see a conclusion.
Years.
Right.
So before COVID, the courts in California were backed up. It was very hard to get a court date. Since COVID, courts have been shut down. Nationally, there have been some trials on Zoom, and as lawyers, we're all worried about how is this going to happen. So I do know there have been some civil cases that have gone to trial, not many. I don't know if that's happening in California. This is probably not a case you would want on Zoom for a variety of reasons. So to get a trial date, my guess is 2022. even if you said, okay, we're going to fast track this, we're going to agree to share information, we're going to do everything and not ask for a lot of continuances, we're not going to ask for more time, it's still going to be 2022. And in the meantime, what happens with Halo Beauty and both parties are going to be really important of how much money they're going to be talking at the end, because parties can't just throw up their hands going, there's a lawsuit, I'm not doing anything. They have a duty to mitigate, or basically to reduce the damages as much as they can, and kind of keep going. So they can't say, okay, you're suing me, I'm going to do absolutely nothing, and I'm just going to I'm going to complain and get the money because you're suing me. You have to do something to help yourself.
Right, and I think that is like a more complicated question when it comes to Tati right now, because we haven't seen her on the internet for months now, and we hadn't seen her for months before that. But Halo is still selling. You can still buy a Tati beauty palette. These things aren't shut down. But I do think it's possible that we don't see Tati until we see a conclusion to all of this.
It's possible. I would be very surprised because, at the end of the day, at the end of the lawsuit, you would hope that she doesn't pack it up and leave. And in order, just because of the way YouTube works, the way things move really quickly, I don't think that the lawsuit is going to prevent anyone from kind of continuing to operate as long as they're really careful. And someone who's saying this is her lawyer, is on Twitter right now, and is giving information to some YouTubers, or the YouTubers are getting information that I think are probably only going to come from those lawyers, in order to kind of help put Tati in a better light, so that it isn't just this complaint and then a huge void.
Right. And I think, and that's, I don't know what I do in this situation if I'm Tati. She's already disappeared from the internet. We didn't hear from Tati for months leading up to the explanation video about James Charles, and we haven't heard from her since. We haven't seen Tati in such a long time, and I don't know. There are other lawsuits at play at the moment. There's a lawsuit related to the Drama Channel Without a Crystal Ball that we're not going to get into.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that we're not going to get into right now. But there's a lot happening. But I think both of us went into looking at this complaint thinking that Tati was in the wrong, and have come out on the other side not necessarily feeling that way.
Well, I think that it's always hard when you see a complaint, because it's obviously written so that when you read it, you believe the plaintiff's side, and Swanson's the plaintiff here. And on first reading, it's absolutely drafted in a way that makes Swanson look good and Tati and James look bad. Sometimes in ways that are not relevant to the lawsuit. When you actually look into it and you look at, is there ever any evidence that we think that are here, or any evidence that he claims that would kind of support his idea, there's a lot lacking in this. And you don't have to put all the evidence in the complaint. There's certainly enough in there, so I don't think that a court's going to kick it out saying there's not enough in here, you're not going to win. But it is really easy to look at particularly women who are in business, who do things that any business person would do, and go, oh, you're not being warm and cuddly, you must be a horrible person. And that is something that I think Tati is, because of her personality on camera, because of the way she's been positioned, there is a huge risk that this mudslinging is going to hurt her more than it would hurt a similarly situated man, or a similarly situated person that hasn't been in the complaint, or some of the tweets are talking about, she's Snow White. You don't have to be Snow White to succeed in business.
No.
But a lot of times you're blamed if you're not.
Well, and Taylor Swift said it best. If Tati was the man, she'd be the man. But I do think that that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah.
There's not a neat way to wrap it up. We're waiting for a response from Tati, who we aren't hearing from in social media. We're not hearing from James in social media, and I don't expect to hear from anybody until we see a response come through, which we could be waiting months for. So altogether, it's possible we don't talk about this again until next year, but it's also possible that something happens. So I don't know. But I think that was really great background and information from you, and I really appreciate you coming to talk about it. You answered a lot of my questions. I feel like you answered a lot of the people in the general internet questions. I don't know if they'll see this, but I hope they do.
So what I want to know is, like as lawyer, as someone who is really interested in a lot of the like legal geekery, there's a lot of things that I find really interesting that I don't know if like normal people find interesting. So I really want to know what other people find interesting and what questions they have that we haven't answered. Because I know everyone has a whole lot of questions.
Absolutely. So I think that just leads to, if you have further questions, ask them in the comment section below. Please let us know, and we will do this again happily. There is a lot in a lawsuit, and like we did mention, there is also the Without a Crystal Ball lawsuit. So let me know if that's something you would like to hear about, if you'd like to see Kathryn come back, and if not, that's all, folks. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.